Night lay across open water, in a single dark sheet, unbroken by coastline or cliff. The sea extended in every direction, a wide plain of moving shadow, lifting in slow swells that rose and sank with patient regularity. The sky above held a thin scatter of stars, softened by faint high cloud, that drifted without pattern, here and there. A line of phosphorescence appeared where a swell folded and dissolved, then vanished again, leaving the surface dark. No gulls crossed, no distant city glow lingered at the horizon. Only the steady, measured motion of water and the slow passage of cloud marked the hours. Far away, almost indistinguishable at first, a pale column of light turned once across the darkness, then disappeared, then returned, as if the night itself were being gently examined. The turning beam made a quiet rhythm across the sea. It swept in a slow arc, brightened a narrow band of water, then slid onward, leaving darkness behind as naturally as it arrived. Each pass revealed details that existed all along. A faint ripple line, a smooth trough between swells, a brief shimmer, where foam thinned into glassy skin. When the beam moved away, the revealed details faded back into shadow, not erased, simply returned to the wider night. The light was neither harsh nor blinding. It was clean and steady, a pale lantern-like clarity, traveling across open water. The beam completed its circle with calm precision. After a brief pause where the mechanism aligned, it began again, tracing the same patient sweep, repeating the pattern without hurry. As the beams swept, a structure emerged from the dark, a lighthouse rising directly from the sea, with no visible rock shelf, no breakwater, no shoreline to claim it. The tower stood on a circular base that met the water cleanly, as though the ocean had decided to hold it upright. Its stonework was pale where light caught it, and charcoal where shadow held. Narrow windows punctuated the tower in a vertical line, each window dark, each frame neat. Higher up, a gallery ring circled beneath the lantern room, guarded by a metal railing that glinted when the beam passed. The lantern room itself was a faceted glass crown, turning slowly with the light inside. The lighthouse did not seem isolated so much as placed with intention, centered in open water like a quiet point on a blank map. Swells approached, lifted slightly as they met the tower's round foundation, then divided and slid away in curved streams. When the beam passed, those flecks looked like tiny chips of pearl drifting on ink. Between swells, the sea surface smoothed for brief moments, revealing a faint reflection of the tower, a broken vertical smear that trembled and rejoined and trembled again. The tower's base showed a dark band at the waterline, as if the sea had painted it over many nights. A small ladder of iron rungs was set into the stone near one side, descending toward the water, though the lower rungs disappeared into darkness and moving swell.
The lantern room held the source of the turning beam, enclosed by clear panes framed with thin metal ribs.
Inside, a bright lens assembly rotated with measured steadiness, its glass elements catching and shaping the light. The lens did not glitter wildly. It held a controlled brightness, focused and consistent. As it turned, it cast a narrow blade of illumination outward, then widened slightly at the edges, before narrowing again, like a fan opening and closing. Around the lantern room, small vents and metal brackets sat neatly aligned, each piece riveted in place. The gallery ring below carried a thin dusting of salt that dulled the metal to a soft gray. The railing posts were evenly spaced, repeating around the circle in a calm procession. Everything appeared built for repetition. The turning, the shining, the returning of the beam, across empty sea. On the tower's seaward side, a door stood above the waterline, reached by a short platform that wrapped around a portion of the base. The platform's surface was planked and weathered, boards darkened by spray. A simple metal gate blocked one edge where the platform ended, as if it once connected to something that no longer existed. The door itself was painted a faded color, now closer to gray than anything else, and its hinges were thick, designed to resist wind and salt. A small lantern fixture hung above the door, unlit, its glass cloudy. When the turning beam swept past, it briefly brightened the door's surface, revealing shallow scratches and old paint layers, then moved on. The door remained closed, complete in its stillness. Inside the tower, a spiral stair wrapped upward along the inner wall. The steps were stone, slightly worn at their centers, edges rounded by time and passage. Narrow windows cut into the stone allowed thin slices of night to enter. The air within the stairwell held the quiet scent of stone and iron and old wood. Landings appeared at intervals, small platforms where the spiral paused, then continued. The structure felt orderly and contained, a vertical corridor designed to carry motion upward, while keeping everything else steady and unchanged. One level held a small room set into the tower's thickness. A table stood near the center, its surface cleared except for a compass in a brass case, and a folded chart held by two smooth stones at the corners. The chart showed lines and marks that suggested routes and depths, though its ink had softened over time. Along one wall, shelves held glass bottles and coils of rope and a neatly stacked set of lantern wicks. A clock with a plain face ticked quietly, its hands moving in slow increments. A barometer in a wooden frame hung beside it, its needle steady. The room's window was narrow and tall, looking out onto open water that offered no landmarks, only the occasional sweep of the lighthouse beam across the surface, returning light to its own origin as it passed. Above, the lantern mechanism carried its own quiet sound. Somewhere within the tower, gears aligned and realigned, keeping the beam's pace consistent. Everything sounded calibrated for smooth repetition. The clock in the instrument room added a second rhythm, a faint tick that met the hum without competing. Between those sounds, the sea offered its own soft percussion against the bass, water rising, contacting stone, sliding away. The three rhythms overlapped. Tick, tide forming a quiet pattern that persisted without change, like lines drawn on transparent layers. The gallery ring beneath the lantern room offered a narrow walkway around the tower's crown. The floor was metal grating, patterned in small diamonds, allowing spray to pass through rather than collect. The railing was solid and simple, its top rail rounded and smooth, posts bolted to the ring at regular spacing. From this height, the sea appeared as a vast surface of slow movement, swells forming long dark shapes that rolled beneath the tower and continued onward. The turning beam swept across the horizon line and returned, tracing its circle with the same steady tempo. When the beam crossed the gallery, it lit the metal briefly, making the grating pattern sharp. Then it moved on, and the pattern soft again. The air here carried fine salt, and the tower's stone felt slightly damp where night mist settled. Beyond the lighthouse, the sea provided no shore and no familiar boundary. Swells traveled in broad, slow lines, their crests rising like gentle ridges, their troughs deepening into smooth valleys. Occasionally, A distant patch of foam formed a pale ring where currents crossed, then thinned and disappeared. The turning beam gave the sea a temporary architecture, illuminated bands that appeared like roads, then vanished. Between passes, the water returned to uniform darkness. The lighthouse stood as the only fixed vertical form in a landscape of constant motion, not opposing the sea, simply sharing space with it, allowing swells to pass and light to turn and night to continue. Lower down, near the waterline, a landing jutted from the tower's base. A small platform built for approach. Its boards were thick, edges darkened, and iron cleats were fixed at the corners for tying lines. A set of posts rose from the platform, though no ropes were attached now. At one end, a short section of railing remained, bent slightly inward, as if shaped by wind over many seasons. A metal ring, embedded in the stone, suggested a former connection point, perhaps for a gangway, perhaps for a ladder that once extended farther out. When swells rose, they lifted near the platform and sent spray across the boards in thin sheets. The spray caught the beam and flashed briefly, then fell away. The landing remained empty, ready without expecting arrival. A quiet extension of the tower's base into moving water. Fog drifted in at intervals, not thick enough to hide the tower, but enough to soften it. The lighthouse beam became wider in the fog, its edges blurring into a pale cone that illuminated suspended moisture. The lantern room's glass panes looked frosted for a time, and the tower's stonework lost some of its sharp lines, turning into a smooth silhouette. The fog moved as a slow sheet across the water, passing the lighthouse like a gentle curtain drawn and released. The beam narrowed again, resuming its crisp sweep across open water. Another room within the tower held a plain wooden table and a chair with a curved back. The table's surface was marked with faint rings and scratches, the kind left by tools and time. A small oil lamp sat at one corner, unlit, its glass chimney slightly cloudy. Beside it lay a ledger, closed, its cover worn at the edges. A pencil rested neatly along the spine, aligned as though placed with care. Hooks on the wall held a heavy coat and a pair of gloves, both hanging straight, unmoving. A small shelf above the hooks supported a tin box and a folded cloth. Nothing in the room appeared scattered. Even in darkness, the shapes held their order. Table centered, chair tucked. Objects positioned with quiet intention. Outside the narrow window, the turning beam passed, again and again, placing moving light across the sea beyond the glass. The beam continued its circuit, steady as a slow metronome. Each sweep began with a brightening at the lantern room, then a long reach outward, then a gradual softening as it moved away. The sea accepted the light and released it. Accepted and released, leaving no trace beyond a temporary shimmer. The tower's stone surface alternated between pale and dark as the beam passed, revealing mortar lines and small imperfections, then hiding them again. Windows appeared as black slits, then briefly gained a thin rim of reflected light, then returned to darkness. The base remained constant, water rising and falling against it with muted persistence. Above, cloud drifted slowly, sometimes thinning to show more stars, sometimes thickening into a smooth lid. The lighthouse did not change its pace to match cloud or swell. It kept its own rhythm, and the night arranged itself around that turning. Over time, patterns on the sea became noticeable by repetition. Swells approached the tower in long lines, separated by nearly equal distances. Each line rose, rounded, then lowered as it met the lighthouse base, splitting into two curved paths that wrapped around and rejoined behind. Foam traces drew brief arcs, like chalk lines on dark slate, then dissolved into the next motion. In the beam's light, the sea sometimes showed a faint grid of ripples, crossing at shallow angles. Currents meeting and smoothing each other away. Near the tower, the water carried small spinning eddies that turned once or twice, then stretched out into straight flow again. The lighthouse stood at the center of these shifting geometries, a fixed point that made the moving lines easier to see when light passed. Then the beam moved onward, and the geometries returned to darkness, continuing without display. The lantern room's glass held small beads of moisture at times, dots that caught the light and turned into tiny stars. Metal ribs between panes formed a repeating pattern of vertical lines, each line evenly spaced around the circle. The rotating lens assembly behind the glass moved with calm certainty, never speeding, never slowing. When the beam pointed outward, the glass momentarily brightened, and the ribs cast thin shadows that shifted as the mechanism turned. Vents near the lantern roof released faint wisps of warm air into the cooler night, invisible except where the beam briefly lit the moisture in the air. The gallery railing remained still, its posts holding the ring as though it were part of the stone. Everything in the lantern room suggested careful construction. Parts aligned, seams sealed, movement controlled. The lighthouse did not need a shore to justify its presence. Its purpose existed in its own turning, its own steady light set against open water. As the night advanced, the sea darkened slightly, and the beam seemed to carve the darkness more clearly. Reflections shortened when ripples increased, then lengthened again when the surface smoothed. Fog returned in thinner strands, and then drifted away, leaving the tower's edges crisp for a while. Clouds shifted higher, and more stars appeared in faint clusters, small and steady. The lighthouse continued its cycle without interruption. Sweep, pause, sweep again. Inside the tower, rooms remained arranged, tables and shelves and hooks holding their places. The clock continued its quiet work. Outside, the base met the waterline, as it always had, accepting each swell and releasing it. Gradually, the illuminated bands on the sea became softer at their far edges, as though the light were settling into the water rather than skimming it. The beam still turned, still reached, still returned, while the surrounding darkness became smoother and more complete. Nothing arrived from the horizon, and nothing departed toward it. The open water remained a wide, quiet field of motion. The lighthouse stood as a single vertical landmark, its stonework alternating between pale and shadow with each turn of the beam. The landing remained empty, the door above it closed, the ladder rungs half hidden by the sea's rise and fall. The break in darkness made by the beam continued to move across the surface in the same familiar arc. For long stretches, the only visible changes were small. A foam seam forming, thinning, disappearing, a cloud sliding over a cluster of stars, a slight widening of the beam's glow when moisture drifted through. The sea did not resist these changes. It carried them, and smoothed them out. The lighthouse did not announce endings, or beginnings. It remained in steady operation, a gentle repetition set in the center of an unmarked night. Over the final stretch of the night's deep quiet, the beam seemed to narrow slightly, not by mechanism, but by the way the surrounding darkness settled. Each sweep remained bright at its center, yet the edges softened, fading more gently into shadow. The sea surface looked smoother between swells, and reflections became longer, thinner lines that trembled less, as if the water had slowed its small movements. The tower's windows stayed dark, their frames only briefly outlined when the beam passed. The lantern room continued to rotate, the lens shaping light with calm precision. The baits met the water in the same clean circle, accepting the tide's slow touch. The open horizon remained empty and uninterrupted. The lighthouse kept turning its quiet light through the unbounded sea, and the scene remained simple. Stone, glass, metal, and water, arranged in steady repetition, until the darkness held nearly everything, except the soft, returning sweep.